Hello and welcome back to Business 101 Online. This chapter we're going to be talking about structuring organizations for today's challenges. So let's first talk about what is structuring an organization. And structuring an organization is where we create a division of labor, set up teams or departments. We are allocating resources, assigning tasks, establishing procedures, and adjusting to new realities. So adjusting to changes. So hopefully that kind of sounds familiar. Remember in chapter 7, I gave you this slide right here where we talked about, hey, in chapter 7, we said, hey, here are the 4 functions of management: planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. And in chapter 7, we mostly talked about planning. And then I also said that in the following few chapters, we're going to be talking about these other 3 things: leading, organizing, and controlling. So this chapter, we're going to be focusing on organizing, which is one of the 4 functions of management. So as the times change, so must organizations. What kind of changes are there? Well, there's global competition. We have maybe there's a declining economy. Maybe we've seen in the last decade a fast technological change and pressure to protect the environment. So let's go back and start talking about a little bit about the history of management and organizational theory. So 2 of the people that are famous for organizational theory are Henry Fayol and Max Weber. So Fayol said, hey, he mostly took a management point of view. He looked around and he said, hey, there are no management books. As the Industrial Revolution occurred, and you see people going from small businesses in their home where maybe they're weaving baskets at home and doing other things at home. Now they're going into large cities, creating these large organizations. And so as you have a big group of people that are working for you, you need to start thinking about management and how to properly manage those large groups of people. And he looked around and he said, there are no management theories. And so he went to different organizations and started constructing this, what we call classical management theory. So his focus was really how to train managers. So he said, hey, we need a unity of command. We need a hierarchy. And we'll kind of talk about what all these things mean later. We need division of labor. And we need clear communication. And we need to talk about how centralized our authority should be. In addition, we have Weber, who kind of took a more step back point of view. He was more looking at it from a bureaucratic point of view. He says, hey, we need these very clear lines of chain of command, similar to Fayol. And he wanted these commands written down so there was no confusion of what the rules were. He wanted consistent procedures, regulations. He wanted job descriptions, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And he wanted staffing instead of people being promoted because their uncle was the manager. Staffing promotions are based on qualifications, because why? We want the best employees for jobs, not just who is the most popular or who has the connections. We want promotions based upon qualifications. So let's take a look at some vocabulary. So management theories, the classical management theories that we're going to be talking about, and this should actually say chapter 8, I apologize, are Henry Fayol and Max Weber. What did they want? They wanted these main 4 things that they had in common. They wanted what's called division of labor. Division of labor is just saying, hey, we're going to have specialized jobs with job descriptions. So instead of having one person build a car from start to finish, maybe that one person is now in charge of installing just the engine, and somebody else is specialized for putting on the wheels, and somebody else is specialized for the chassis, so on and so forth. They also wanted departmentalization. So that kind of takes division of labor a little bit further. And that's dividing the organization into separate units of workers grouped by their skills or expertise. So if you look at this chart that I put on this slide, you might have production department, the marketing department, and the finance department. And they wanted a hierarchy. So they wanted a clear chain of command from top to bottom, where one person is at the top of the organization and there's this clear progression from top to bottom. So you might have for this particular picture a president or the CEO, and then you have his 3 plant managers, and then first line managers from there, so on and so forth. So these workers down here, they know, okay, my manager up is this first line manager. He knows that his manager is manager A, and manager A knows that his boss is the president. So clear chain of command. They wanted written regulations and procedures that were enforced, and they wanted promotions based on qualifications. Now, off of this theory, that gave way to some other things. One big thing was the organizational structure. So they said, hey, we're going to create an organization chart. Businesses should create a chart that's a visual chart so that everyone can see what the relationship is among the business. So this right here to the right is what we call an organization chart. So people know where the chain of command lies. They wanted authority. It could be either centralized or decentralized, but it needs to be communicated to the people. So what is centralized authority? That's where all the authority is concentrated at the top. This is kind of the classical model of authority, line of authority. Usually it's centralized, but now we're going more towards decentralized authority. And in order to have proper decentralized authority, you need to empower your lower level employees to make decisions. Now, there is a lot of content for Chapter 8. In fact, there were 63 slides, and I imagine it managed to cut it down to about 20 slides. So please make sure that you are reading your textbook for this chapter. There is a lot of content. I'm briefly going over each thing, but please make sure that you read the chapter so that you can kind of understand in depth what each of these things that I'm talking about. All right, so authority can be centralized or decentralized, depending on how much power you want to give your employees. Your span of control, so authority and span of control are kind of related, but not the same. Span of control is different. Span of control is talking about how many subordinates each manager supervises. I think in the textbook it says, hey, each manager really shouldn't be managing more than 15 employees, otherwise they can't really properly manage. So if you have a broad span of control, that's where you have lots of employees. You might have one manager with, overseeing a whole factory of employees, maybe 30 employees, and they're just standing there watching their employees. And when do you use a broad span of control? That's when you have standardized work, easy work, things that, hey, these workers, they're taking a button off the conveyor belt and putting a button onto whatever they put buttons on, right? Think about I Love Lucy with broad span of control, where you have this conveyor belt coming down the line, and they're supposed to be putting the chocolates into these boxes. Supposedly, it's really supposed to be easy, right? And then narrow span of control, you use that for specialized work. So if you have engineers creating aircrafts, that's specialized, and you need a narrow span of control, which means you have one manager maybe only managing 4 or 5 people instead of 30 or 40. And your structure can be tall or flat. We typically see the flat organizational structure in the smaller businesses, right? So you might see the owner with his 6 or 7 employees, right? This might be the organization structure at a local Subway, where you have the owner, manager, and all of his employees. And a tall organizational structure is when you have lots of layers of management. You might see that at larger organizations. For example, Walmart, they have their CEO, then they have their branch managers, then they have they might have, one manager for the East Coast, one manager for the West Coast, one manager for, overseas. They have a very tall organizational structure versus a flat one, which flat, I normally think about small business. So again, make sure that you are reading the textbook. I deleted a lot of slides and a lot of content just so that this lecture could be shorter and you can kind of tie in all the ideas together. So my goal is really to tie all these ideas together for you. And your job really should be to go out and actually read the chapter and understand the nitty-gritty of each of these concepts. For those of you who are in my Business 101 online class, this is for you, where it says CT number 1. That's to help you with critical thinking number 1 question that I assigned for homework this week. So make sure that you understand what are the advantages and disadvantages of the different spans of control. Remember, you can have a narrow or a broad span of control. Remember, narrow is better for when you are specializing your work, whereas broad is better for when you have a repetitive task. Okay. So the Industrial Revolution, I think I mentioned it before when we were talking about Weber and Fayol. The Industrial Revolution gave rise to the need for management theories because now you have large organizations and you need to learn how to properly manage your assets, your employees. And that also gave rise to some other ideas like economies of scale. What is that? That's basically the idea that the more you mass produce a product, the lower the cost per item is. So say you are only manufacturing 10 bikes. Well, maybe each bike, after you figure out your costs, it costs you $100 per bike. But let's just say you start massing producing those bikes. Maybe you can make 100 bikes for and when you divide it all out, and it's only cost you $10 per bike. So economies of scale, that's where you're trying to lower your cost per item by mass producing your items. Then there's also benchmarking. That's where, remember, part of the 4 functions of management. Let's go back. Part of your 4 functions of management was controlling. So benchmarking is part of that controlling, where you're measuring results against corporate objectives. And core competencies. When we talked about core competencies a little bit in chapter 7. So core competency is what a company can do well, better than others. That's kind of the very low level definition of it. Really, a core competency, when we were doing our SWOT analysis, we were talking about, hey, what is a company's strength? So a core competency is something the company possesses that gives it an advantage over its competitors. For example, maybe Netflix, there's a lot of streaming content services out there, but maybe Netflix, one of their core competencies is their predictive analytics. They have algorithms that will predict what you, the customer, is going to want to watch. And so they're able to say, hey, I think you're going to really like this movie. And so you, the customer, you get a lot of content that you like, so you continue with their service. So core competency, something that gives that company an edge over other companies. What are their strengths? Core competency. Restructuring. Why do we restructure? So that it's more efficient and effective in serving their customers. Right, something that worked 10 years ago may not work now, so you might need to restructure, maybe get rid of some mid-level managers, maybe you need to empower your lower-level employees. You just need to continue going with the current times, right? And one of the things that some companies are doing is going towards an inverted organization. So a regular organization looks like a pyramid, an inverted organization looks like an upside-down pyramid, where an organization has contact people at the top and the CEO at the bottom of the organization charts. And again, you can read more about that in the text. I really encourage you to read the text, especially for this chapter. One of the other things that you need to be aware of when you're talking about organization is every organization has a culture. There's a corporate culture, which is kind of the widely shared values within an organization. And within that culture, you have both a formal and informal organization. Formal are kind of those lines of authority. You saw we had that organization chart where you're posting, hey, this is your job. Maybe you're putting it in writing or a memo. This is your job. This is what you're supposed to do. This is how things work in our organization. Maybe the organization gives you new employees a handbook of, hey, this is our formal organization, all the responsibilities, this is what we do here at our organization. Informal organization is kind of hard to quantify. It's when your employees are going and eating lunch. what kind of relationship do they have among each other? Is it a positive relationship or a negative relationship? Are they talking positively about the organization, or are they always trashing the organization? That's your informal organization. Kind of, I had one professor say, hey, the informal organization is what you hear by the water cooler. The things that employees say, but they don't actually put in writing. Just covered a lot of vocabulary for chapter 8. Now for the rest of this video, I'm going to be talking about the 4 ways to structure an organization, which leads to critical thinking number 2. So critical thinking number 2, you're supposed to analyze the question and say, hey, is this a line and staff, matrix, or cross-functional organization? So 4 main types of organizations. A line organization is one where you just have everybody is a line personnel, meaning everybody is part of the direct producing of the goods and services that you have at your place. There are no specialists. There's no legal department. There's no HR department. None of that. So everybody is working towards the production of whatever product that you produce. So this would be kind of a line organization here in the picture, right? Then there's a line and staff organization. That's where you still have the line. So that's why we call it line and staff. You still have people working towards producing. This would be this line straight up and down with the CEO, the plant manager, and all these orange boxes right here. That's your line. Then you have your staff who are contributing to help your line. So your staff employees advise, assist the line personnel in meeting their goals. This is your research department, your HR department, your IT department. So they're not actually producing things that your business sells, but they're helping the line personnel. Next, we have kind of, this is a newer organization model, the matrix organization, which is actually very similar to the cross-functional organization. A matrix organization is temporary. So you're working on a special project for a short amount of time, then everybody goes back to where they came from. When do you use a matrix organization? When you're working on creative product development, a special project, things like that. So here is a sample matrix organizational chart. You notice that there's departmentalization. Remember earlier we talked about departmentalization. You have the project management, manufacturing, marketing, finance, and engineering. So those are your different departments. But now you might take an employee from each of these departments and put them and make them a project. So for example, employee A right here, employee A buyer in magenta, has 2 managers now. They have their project manager and they have their manager, manufacturing manager. So in a matrix organization, you have projects that are temporary. And so each employee, while they're working on a project, has multiple managers, one for the project and another one for their particular department in departmentalization. Now, if you read the chapter, one of the weaknesses of departmentalization is that then you get your employees to be dedicated more to your department rather than to the entire organization. So, for example, employee A might, if you have a strict departmentalization, then employee A might just try to hoard resources for only the department. They might not share best practices or any of their knowledge with any of the other departments. Versus, so you might get competing departments in departmentalization. Versus when you have this matrix organization, now employee A is interacting with employees from all the other departments. So employee A, their dedication might be a little twofold, right? It might be now to the project and to their own department. So you don't get that some of the negative side effects that you have with departmentalization, where you have people basically in silos in departmentalization. You don't have much sharing amongst the different departments. Versus now you have sharing amongst the different departments because they're working together on a common goal, a project. So here again are the advantages of matrix. One of the ones that we talked about just now was now you have cooperation between the departments, and you're getting creative solutions because you have people from different departments, and you have more efficient use of organizational resources. What are some disadvantages? Well, it can be costly and very complex. And remember, Feo and Weber, they said, hey, we need clear channels of authority. Well, this isn't, Now you have an employee who might be confused because are they committed to the project or are they committed to the department? Very similar to matrix organization is a cross-functional or self-managed team. This is when you get basically the same thing as a matrix, but it's on a long-term basis. And what's one of the pros of this over a regular matrix organization? Well, because it's long-term, now you're developing these long-term teams who are working closely together and developing relationships with one another. And when you have people in teams working together on a long-term basis, then you can empower those teams to work and be very responsive to the customers. Hopefully this was helpful for you in tying all the different things from this chapter together. Remember, there were 63 slides. I condensed it down to 20. So make sure you're reading the textbook to understand all the different details on the subject matter that we just discussed.